If you're Scorpio sun, you've heard it all. You're dark, you're intense, you're obsessed with death and sex. People treat your entire personality, I think, like it's a Halloween costume you decided to wear year round. And honestly, they're completely missing what's happening. Here's what most astrology gets wrong. Your sun isn't your personality, it's your developmental assignment. It's a seasonal condition you were born into, and therefore the survival strategy you're here to master. Scorpio season falls in mid-autumn, which is roughly October 23rd through around November 21st, when everything visible is dying and all the real transformation is happening underground where no one can see it. See, this isn't about being dark, it's about being born into a season that teaches transformation, strategic evaluation, and a specific kind of trust you need when resources are scarce and winter is coming. See, what people call Scorpio traits could actually be mid autumn intelligence. So let's correct the record. Number one, people think you're obsessed with death when you're actually obsessed with transformation. You see, everyone assumes Scorpios have some morbid fascination with death, but that's not what's happening. You're not sitting around contemplating mortality for fun. You're hardwired to understand that death and transformation are the same process, and that understanding is Mid Autumn's entire assignment. You see, in Mid Autumn, everything that was green and alive is now visibly dying. The leaves are falling, the growth has stopped, and everything looks dead. But underground, the real transformation is actually getting popping. See, the fallen leaves are breaking down into nutrients, the trees are pulling their energy inward, and what looks like an ending is actually the most critical transformation process of the entire year. You understand that nothing actually ends, it just changes form. When a relationship quote unquote dies, you're watching where that energy goes. When a career falls apart, you're tracking what's composting into the next phase. And that isn't morbid, that's you recognizing that the most important changes happen in the invisible, uncomfortable, falling apart phase that everybody else wants to skip. Number two, people think you're vengeful when you're actually running a very sophisticated risk assessment. And I may have messed up on some of my slides, because obviously I forgot to put the your here, but let's just imagine, and you can just see right here, see? But the Scorpios never forget and always get revenge thing is probably one of the most exhausting stereotype and it completely misunderstands what you're actually doing because you're not plotting revenge, you're running continuous risk assessment on whether someone is safe to trust with limited resources, because mid-autumn is when you have to make critical choices about what and who to invest in before winter, and there's no room for error. If someone shows you they're unreliable, careless with what you shared, or willing to betray trust when it's convenient, that information doesn't disappear. It literally can't. That's data you need for survival. So what people call holding a grudge is actually you remembering that someone failed a trust test and you're adjusting your resource allocation accordingly. You're not trying to punish them, but maybe you're just protecting what's yours. Because mid autumn doesn't have the luxury of unlimited trust, so you have to be careful, not cruel. Number three, people think you're manipulative when you're actually testing for some depth. See, people love to accuse Scorpios of being manipulative, but what they're actually complaining about is that you test people, because you know y'all do. You test whether someone means what they say, whether they're going to show up when it's hard, whether they can handle the truth without falling apart. And that's not necessarily manipulation, but evaluation, because mid-autumn can't afford surface level connections. Winter is coming, and you need to know who's actually solid when resources get tight. So yeah, you create this like situations that end up revealing character. You ask questions that exposes inconsistencies, and you watch how people behave when they think no one's watching. And this is strategic intelligence, not emotional game playing. See, the difference is manipulation is about control. Testing, I think, is about accuracy. You're not trying to make people do what you want. You're trying to know what they're actually made of before you give them access to anything that matters. Because Mid Autumn teaches that trust must be earned through demonstrated reliability, not just given freely because someone seems nice. Number four, people think you are jealous when you're actually protective of what took forever to freaking build. See, the jealousy accusation I think is interesting because it assumes that you're being irrational. But when you've spent enormous energy building something, maybe a relationship, a creative project, a sense of safety, and someone threatens it, your response isn't jealousy, it's protection. Because again, Mid Autumn teaches that accumulation is slow and that loss is fast. Everything that grew all spring and summer can literally die in a single frost. So when you sense a threat to something you've cultivated, your response is total and immediate. And that's not insecurity. That's you understanding how much time and energy it takes to grow something real and refusing to just let it be carelessly destroyed. What looks like possessiveness is actually you recognizing value that other people take for granted. You see, you don't get jealous about things that don't matter. You get protective of things that took real transformation to create. And I think there's a difference there. Number 5, people think you're too intense when you're actually operating at the depth that real change requires. You see, you're too intense is what people say when they want the benefits of depth without the uncomfortable work that depth requires. They want transformation, right? Without the falling apart part. They want that intimacy without the vulnerability. They want growth without letting anything die. And you can't give them that because Mid Autumn just doesn't work that way. When you have real transformation, it's intense. It requires going all the way down into what's not working and sitting with what's uncomfortable and letting what needs to die actually just die. And you can't casually do that. You can't do that while also keeping everything light and fun and woohoo. Mid autumn is not the season for that. When people say you're too intense, what they're really saying is that they want to stay on the surface where it's safe and ain't nothing got to change. And you probably can't just join them there because your developmental assignment is depth, and depth requires intensity. And that's not a personality flaw. That's you doing what you're built to do. Number 6, people think you don't trust anyone when you actually trust very deeply. Want is earned. See, the Scorpios have trust issues narrative is exhausting because it assumes that trust should just be automatic. It shouldn't. Mid Autumn teaches that trust is earned through consistent, demonstrated reliability over time. And that's not trust issues, that's appropriate caution. You're not walking out assuming everyone's out to get you. You're watching how people behave, you're watching how they mofos move, and you're testing whether their actions match their words, and you're evaluating whether they can handle what you'd actually give them if you let them in all the way. And that's not paranoia, that's intelligent evaluation. And what I think people miss is that once you do trust someone, you're trusting them completely. You'll give them everything. You'll defend them when no one else will, and you'll show up in ways that most people can't even imagine. But they have to earn that first because Mid Autumn can't afford to be wasting resources on people who won't protect what they're given. Number 7, people think you're controlling when you're actually preventing avoidable disasters. See, the control thing, it comes up a lot, I think, but what people call control is usually you trying to prevent obviously bad outcomes that everyone else is ignoring. You're not controlling for the sake of power, even though I think some more power, but you're controlling because you can see exactly how this ends if no one else intervenes. So because of that, Mid Autumn has to plan for winter. You can't just hope it works out. You can't just trust that everything's going to be okay. You have to actually think through what happens if the harvest fails, if the weather turns, if someone doesn't follow through. So yeah, you want to influence outcomes, but that's called being responsible. What feels controlling to other people is actually you trying to prevent waste, loss, or disaster that you can see coming from a mile away. They think that you're being controlling when you're being or they think that you're being dangerously naive. And honestly, I find that Mid Autumn is usually just right and right on the money. Number 8, people think you're obsessed with sex when you're actually more obsessed with merger. See, the sex thing is probably the most reductive Scorpio stereotype, and it completely misses what you're interested in. Yeah, Scorpio energy is associated with sexuality, and not because you're somehow more hornier than the other signs. It's because sex is the most accessible metaphor for what you're actually after. Complete merger. Mid autumn is when separate things combine. to create something new. The leaves, they merge with the soil. The individual, it dissolves into the collective. What was mine becomes ours. And sex is interesting to you, not because of the physical act, but because it's one of the few experiences where boundaries actually dissolve and two separate things become temporarily one. And you're interested in any experience that creates that level of merger, creative collaboration, deep friendship, spiritual practice, psychological exploration. It just happens that sex is the most obvious example. So that's what people fixate on. But what you really want, y'all, is the death of separation. That's the mid-autumn assignment. Number 9, people think you hold grudges forever when you're actually just not pretending things didn't happen. See, the grudge accusation assumes that you should forget, forgive, and move on, like, oh, nothing happened. But mid-autumn don't work that way, child. What happened, happened. The data is in, and you can't unknow what someone showed you about themselves. So this isn't about punishment or revenge. It's about accuracy. If someone showed you they'll betray you when it's convenient, that's not an opinion. That's fact. That's information, boo. You don't hold grudges against reality. You just adjust your behavior based on what's true, and you're going to move differently. See, other people, they want to give second chances and not live in the past. Okay, that's nice. That's fine for them. But you're working with limited resources and no room for error. And you can't afford to keep trusting people who've proven they ain't trustworthy. You ain't got it to do. That's not holding a grudge. That's being realistic. Number 10. People think you're dark and depressed when you're actually comfortable with the full range. You see, people see you acknowledge pain and loss and difficulty or darkness, and they immediately assume that you're depressed, but you're not. You're just not pretending that the hard things don't exist. You see, mid-autumn doesn't get to skip the decay part. The leaves, they fall, things, they die. And that's not depression, that's just reality. So you're actually comfortable with a much wider emotional range than most people because you're not trying to force everything into the positive, because you can sit with the grief without needing to fix it. You can acknowledge darkness without being consumed by it. You can see what's dying without panicking. And that makes you seem dark to people who are working very hard to stay positive and they want to avoid discomfort. But what you're actually doing is being honest. You're not more depressed than anyone else. You're just less committed to pretending everything is fine when it's not. Number 11, people think you're mysterious on purpose when you're actually just not explaining things that haven't finished processing. See, everybody thinks that Scorpios are being mysterious and secretive on purpose. Like you're trying to be seen as being like cool and enigmatic. I can never say that word. But that's not what's happening. You're quiet about things that are still transforming underground because explaining something before it's finished processing would be like digging up a seed to see if it's growing. Because mid-autumn transformation happens in the dark, the underground, the invisible. You can't talk about something while it's still in that phase because talking about it brings it up to the surface before it's ready. So yeah, you're private, but not because you're trying to maintain mystique, but because premature exposure kills the transformation process. When something has finished processing, you'll share it. But until then, it needs to stay in the dark where transformation actually happens. What people call mysterious is just you protecting the invisible work that the real change requires. And number 12, people think you need to lighten up when you're actually operating at the frequency where real work gets done. I think this is probably the most insulting one because it assumes that you're somehow doing life wrong by not being more woohoo, light, fun, easy breezy. But you're not built for that. Your developmental assignment is depth, transformation, strategic evaluation. That's not a defect, that's your purpose. You see, mid-autumn don't need to lighten up. Mid-autumn does the serious work of transformation that makes spring possible. Without mid-autumn, nothing composts, nothing transforms, nothing's break down into the nutrients that fills the next cycle. You're not too serious. You're doing necessary work that other people don't want to do. So when someone tells you to lighten up, what they're really saying is, please stop being uncomfortable so I can stay comfortable. But your job isn't to make other people comfortable. Your job is transformation, and transformation requires going all the way down into what's real, what's hard, what's dying, so something else can live. And that's not light work. I kind of think that's some of the most important work there is, to be honest with you. So the bottom line is if you are a Scorpio sun, you're not dark, obsessed, or damaged. You're a mid-autumn specialist. You're built to handle transformation, evaluate trust, protect resources, and operate at the depth where real change actually happens. What people call your negative traits are actually sophisticated survival strategies for the season you were born into. You're not here to be light and easy or woohoo, whoop it up, in the words of Vicky Gonvalson. You're here to do the uncomfortable work of letting things die so new things can grow. You're here to test for depth and refuse to waste energy on surface level connections. You're here to take transformation seriously because you understand that it's not optional. It's the engine of all growth. The people who get you understand that your intensity isn't something to fix, it's something to respect. And the people who don't get you will keep asking you to be something you're not. So let them. You've got more important work to do.